The marker was running dry by the sixth line. I had to press harder than usual, and the ink came out uneven, thin at the start of the stroke, slightly thicker at the end. So the sixth looked different from the other five. Wider, more deliberate. I noticed it when I capped the marker and looked down at my left wrist, at the row of black lines just above the pulse point, and I thought, if this shift ends without a seventh, I'll let these dry and wash them off before mess. 7 was the threshold I'd set myself, the shift's worth. 6 meant I was nearly done. I never got to wash them off. The Vethon checkpoint had been set up in Bay Corridor 4, in the wide section where the medical wing connected to the transit hub. They'd chosen the spot well, or someone had advised them to. The corridor ran bright even in the station's artificial cycle, a long stretch of white overhead panels and pale composite flooring, and there was nowhere to step around it without going back through the surgical suites, which they had also closed. I found out about the closure when my last patient's transfer paperwork failed to route through, and I stepped out, asked the charge nurse what was happening. She pointed toward the corridor. She didn't say anything else. There were 8 humans ahead of me in the queue when I arrived. Station workers, mostly, dock crew still in their transfer harnesses, a couple of maintenance techs with grease on their sleeves, one civilian contractor I recognized from the habitat module. They were standing in a line, not speaking much, and at the front of the line there was a Vethon preceptor. I had encountered Vethon once before, years back, at a coordination meeting on Oran Station. Their administrators had been present then, lean and formal in their gray robes, and they had sat very still during the proceedings. The preceptor was not an administrator. It was taller, and the stillness about it was a different kind, not formal but attentive, the way a sensor array is attentive. Its hands, when it reached for the wrist of the dock worker at the front of the line, were long-fingered and pale at the joints, the skin there almost translucent. Nobody explained to me what had happened in the station that morning. I had been in the surgical suite since before first cycle, and whatever incident had prompted the checkpoint had not been announced on the medical wing's internal channel. I gathered from the fragments of conversation in the queue that something had occurred in the transit hub. A confrontation, some kind, casualties on both sides. Nobody certain yet of the numbers or the cause. The Vethon had requested permission to conduct what their liaison called a memory consistency evaluation of all station personnel before releasing anyone into the connecting corridors. The station commander, from what I heard, had agreed. What the Vethon read was not thoughts. That was the distinction their liaison had apparently taken some care to explain. They read impression, the texture of recent experience, the residue that strong memories leave on the nervous system's surface. Aggression had a particular texture to them, something they could identify the way a technician identifies stress fractures in composite material without needing to know the full structural history of the thing. They were looking for that texture. Everyone in the queue, I assumed, was hoping they didn't have it. I was not worried about the texture of aggression. I was thinking about the 7th tally line, the one I hadn't drawn yet, and whether the surgical suite would be accessible again before the patient's condition deteriorated enough to require a second intervention. I was running the numbers on that when the preceptor finished with the worker ahead of me and the line moved forward, and it was turn. The preceptor looked at me for a moment before it spoke. Its eyes were a pale amber color, and they moved across my face and then down to my hands, and then back up, a very efficient survey. Left wrist, it said. I held it out, palm up. Its fingers closed around my wrist, not tight, just present, and it went still. The first tally line was a boy of maybe 19, a dock apprentice, who had caught a loose coupling housing in the shoulder when a mooring clamp sheared. The housing had taken a wedge of muscle and left a fragment of metal near the clavicle. I had spent 40 minutes removing that fragment with a tool that was slightly too large for the space I was working in, and I had not rushed it, and I had not spoken much, and when I was done the boy was intact and the fragment was in a sterile tray. The preceptor named none of this aloud. It simply moved to the second line. The second was a woman in her 40s, who had come in holding her hand away from her body, is usually a sign that something inside it is not where it should be. Both bones of the forearm, below the wrist, clean breaks. She had fallen from an equipment platform. I had set the bones and applied the casting wrap and talked to her about the platform. Whether the safety rail had been properly rated for her weight class, because if it hadn't, the station needed to know. She had found something funny, and I had not known exactly what, but I had noted it because it meant her pain response was within range and she was present enough to have a sense of humor about her situation. The preceptor held the second line a moment longer than the first. Then the third. Pressure laceration, long and shallow, on the back of a technician's neck, the kind that bleeds extravagantly and requires more suture than you expect when you first look at it. 12 sutures. I had counted them aloud while I placed them. It was a habit I had picked up years ago from a medic I had worked under, who believed that a patient hearing a count of routine numbers stayed calmer than one left in silence. I don't know if the research supported it. I had kept the habit anyway. The preceptor moved through the third, fourth, the fifth without pausing. The sixth, the line that had taken extra pressure, the one that had come out uneven, was a child of 6, a civilian passenger in transit, who had swallowed a small fastener from a toy and had not told her mother for 2 hours. By the time I saw her, the fastener had lodged low in the esophagus, not obstructing the airway but painful and likely to migrate. I had extracted it with a scope and a retrieval loop, and I had held it up for her to see afterward, and I had said, "There it is." And she had said, "That was mine," and I had said, "I know," and I had put it in a sealed specimen bag and given it to her mother because I did not know what else to do. With it, and children sometimes want unreasonable things returned to them. The preceptor stopped. Its thumb had moved to rest just below the 6th line. It had not moved to the 7th, the space of bare skin above it, where no mark had been drawn yet. It was still. Its amber eyes were fixed on a point somewhere near my collarbone, or past it, in the way that people look when they are not looking at the room they are standing in. I did not move. I kept my arm where it was. The 7th line was for a man named Delvar Osh, a pipe fitter in the secondary water reclamation loop, who had come in at the start of the shift with a chest bruise that turned out to be covering a slow bleed, that turned out to be covering damage I had not been able to fully repair before his body finished the decision it had already started making when he came through the door. Bins into the repair, when his pressure dropped in a way that does not come back. I had kept walking for 6 minutes after that, which is the period I have come to recognize as the distance between what is possible and what is true. And then I had stopped and I had spoken the time aloud for the record, and I had stood there for a moment before moving to the next patient. I had not drawn his line yet because I had not found a spare moment since, and because some part of me wanted to wait until I was ready to draw it correctly. The preceptor held the empty space above the 6th line for a long time. Longer than it had held any of the 6 marks below it. Longer than any pause I had seen it make in the queue ahead of me. Its thumb rested at the edge of where the 7th line would go, touching nothing, reading something. Then it released my wrist. It picked up the clearance form from the surface beside it, and marked it, and handed it to me and said, "Combatant, you may proceed." I took the form. I walked to the end of the corridor and through the junction and back into the medical wing. At the next available moment, in the supply alcove off the surgical prep room, I uncapped the marker and drew the 7th line. I pressed hard enough that it came out straight and even, the same weight as the others, and I capped the marker and looked at the row of 7 marks above my pulse, and I went back to work.